Welcome back to PrakPlays. We're here with another scenario from the 29 Let's Go campaign. In our last video, the Americans under Lieutenant Morris engaged some German defenders under Commander Kampf at the town of Lacombe. Although the Americans were able to quickly secure the village, they made some errors, which cost them some casualties and allowed the Germans' core force to escape without a scratch. Nonetheless, a victory is a victory for the Americans, and we now find them pushing down the Carrington Bayou Highway toward their ultimate objective, the bridge at Insigny. The Americans next arrive at the hamlet of Arthenay, where some German defenders have been spotted.
Like at Lacombe, the Germans have chosen their ground well. On the German side of the field, there are houses, walls, and hedgerows, from which the Germans can observe the Americans. On the American side, however, there is only open ground between their positions and Arthenay. Due to this lack of cover, the Americans have requested some long-range support.
Lieutenant Morris radios battalion headquarters to request a pre-assault barrage in Arthenay. Unfortunately for Lieutenant Morris, the Americans do not have a pre-assault barrage available as a support option in this campaign, so the Game Master, battalion headquarters, must do its best to interpret his request. So a forward observer is attached to Lieutenant Morris's platoon. The observer can call in smoke or a barrage from an off-map mortar battery during the game, but not before the game starts. With the arrival of the forward observer, Lieutenant Morris begins to deploy his men. He plans to line the eastern hedgerow with armor and troops. After deploying smoke or a mortar barrage on the village, his men intend to advance in force across the northern field. This plan is set into motion when Lieutenant Morris deploys Corporal Montez and Corporal Rake's squads along the northern hedgerow with a bazooka team and a flamethrower team. Lieutenant Morris then deploys himself along the northern hedgerow to lead the assault. To the south, Lieutenant Morris deploys Sergeant Lawton and Corporal Leibowitz's squad, plus another tank, to provide covering fire and to look for opportunities.
On the German side, Commander Kampf deploys a Panzerschreck team and an MG-42. The Panzerschreck team makes their way into the orchard to cover the crossroads, while the MG-42 sets up in the farmhouse near the orchard. Commander Kampf also deploys a forward observer, hoping to disrupt any American assault with mortars of his own. Commander Kampf then stations Gross for a squad to the north and Herbig's third squad in a building overlooking the southern field.
With his entire platoon deployed, Lieutenant Morris decides to begin his attack. Although he still hasn't spotted any Germans, after his assault at Lacombe, he assumes the worst is waiting for him. So he orders his forward observer to make contact with the mortar battery. The forward observer relays the coordinates for a smoke barrage on the orchard and calls in a ranging shot. The ranging shot falls nearly on target. The forward observer then requests a full smoke barrage on the ranging shot's position.
As the ranging shot falls, Commander Kampf knows that his men are about to be on the receiving end of an American attack, so he immediately orders his forward observer to contact his mortar battery to disrupt the American attack. Trying to beat the American barrage, he tells his forward observer to disregard any ranging shot and calls for an immediate full barrage.
Commander Kampf's gamble pays off. Before the American smoke barrage begins, the Americans along the northern hedge are hit by the German mortars. A rifleman in Corporal Hancho Montez's platoon is killed. Corporal Rake's squad takes a point of shock, and Lieutenant Morris is nearly killed as a shell lands between his feet. By some miracle, the shell is a dud and fails to explode. In reality, Lieutenant Morris got 4 lucky saves. At the same time, the American tank moves forward into the field in a bid to escape the falling mortar rounds. Despite the limited casualties, the American line is shaken just before its attack begins.
At the same time, American smoke shells begin to fall on Arthenay. Sergeant Lawson watches in the southern hedge as the smoke screen appears. Fearing that his comrades to the north won't take advantage of the opportunity, as they are still under mortar fire, he orders Corporal Leibowitz's squad forward into the town. Alone, Corporal Leibowitz's men double-quick towards Arthenay across the southern field.
Unfortunately, the next American dice roll ends the turn, which also ends the smoke barrage. It seems that the American mortars have run low on smoke rounds at the worst time, as Corporal Leibowitz and his men find themselves halfway across the southern field when the smoke begins to dissipate. In an instant, Herbig's squad fires, killing 3 of Corporal Leibowitz's men. Leibowitz and his men are left to return fire and run to the closest hedgerow. But behind Leibowitz's men, an American tank fires on the house. Between the main gun and the machine gun, 2 of Herbig's men are killed, and a point of shock is added to the squad. These are the first casualties to the core German platoon suffered during the campaign.
The American forward observer watches in horror as Corporal Leibowitz's men are cut down. Pleading with the mortar battery, he is able to call in more smoke rounds. As the smoke begins to fall, the sides exchange one more round of fire, causing another casualty for Corporal Leibowitz and 3 more casualties for Herbig as another tank shell rips through the farmhouse. After losing nearly 50% of the squad, Herbig's squad falls back to another farmhouse. At the same time, Leibowitz and his men finally reach the hedgerow, and then advance onto the barn. Once arriving at the barn, Leibowitz decides to wait for more Americans before clearing the building. This is a good decision, as the Germans previously placed Fige's 2nd squad in the large barn with guns trained on the entrances.
With more smoke rounds falling, Lieutenant Morris and his men begin their advance across the northern field, which continues over the next few phases. Commander Kampf, however, decides to take another gamble. Although he cannot see the Americans through the smoke, he assumes that they are advancing, so he orders his forward observer to move the German mortar battery closer to his lines. Of course, if the barrage is off target, this could lead to German casualties, but it also could land on Lieutenant Morris's men in the open field.
Again, Commander Kampf's gamble pays off. Halfway across the field, the mortar fire lands directly on the Americans. The bazooka team loses a man, so does Corporal Montes' squad, and the Sherman tank and Corporal Rake's squad incur a point of shock. As if the Germans' luck could not get better, again, the American mortars are unable to keep up the smoke barrage.
As the smoke clears, both sides begin to fire on each other. Corporal Leibowitz's squad near the farmhouse spots a German Panzerschreck team in the orchard and fires, killing 1 German. Likewise, an American tank places a high explosive round in the window of a farmhouse, killing 2 Germans in the MG-42 team. At the same time, Groth's squad along a stone wall fires, so does the MG-42, and Lieutenant Morris's men are caught in the open, under fire. Corporal Rake loses a man, and Corporal Montes loses 2.
At the same time, the Germans play their ace card. Off-map, a German Marder 3 platoon has assembled. While they can't see the full American positions, they do have line of sight in the open fields. The Martyrs open fire and quickly destroy the American tank that entered the northern field. Yet, despite the loss of the tank and several men, the Americans have no choice but to keep pushing forward.
And just as quickly as the smoke cleared, it returns, as the Americans drop another smoke barrage. Blinded once more, Commander Kampf again requests that his forward observer bring his mortar rounds in closer in the hopes of hitting the Americans somewhere in the smoke. German mortar rounds now fall indiscriminately along the German front line. The Panzerschreck team in the orchard is nearly killed as trees explode around it. The German squad in the large barn takes a casualty as a mortar round penetrates the roof. But the barrage has a good effect, as Corporal Montes is lightly wounded and loses another man in his squad.
As Lieutenant Morris' men finally reach Corporal Leibowitz's position, nearly a quarter of the Americans on the field are casualties, and it is now time for them to begin clearing the Germans from their position, and Lieutenant Morris orders an end to the smoke barrage.
At this point, Commander Kampf must decide to fight or retreat. He has bloodied the Americans, and their assault must be close to collapsing. But there is still an American tank and mortars on the opposite side of the field that could inflict heavy German casualties. Likewise, although the Germans could likely win a house-to-house fight with the Americans with their fresh squads, it could come at a significant price, affecting their ability to defend in the future scenarios. Overall, Commander Kampf decides to order another barrage to see if he can stop the American advance before it reaches the German positions. But, as his forward observer relays the coordinates for another barrage, he is informed by the mortar battery that their rounds are depleted for the day. With this news, Commander Kampf decides to save his men for another day and orders a general retreat. His men are able to retire safely from the field.
The capture of Arthenay proved bloody for both sides. Lieutenant Morris took 11 casualties, lost another tank, and Corporal Montes was lightly wounded. On the German side, Commander Kampf lost 8 men, 5 of them from his core force. Of these, 2 are killed, 2 are wounded and will miss the next game, and 1 is slightly wounded and can immediately return to duty.
Upon review of the action, there are some announcements. Corporal Leibowitz will receive a soldier's medal for leading his men across the field alone and under fire. His bravery is inspiring to the men, and his squad will be immediately able to shed 2 points of shock in the next scenario should they incur it. Regarding Corporal Montes, his wound is superficial and he is lucky, as he can return next game. Concerning morale, due to the American victory, Colonel Good's outlook remains concerned. Likewise, German morale remains the same for the next scenario. Thanks for watching PrakPlays. We'll return with the next part of our campaign soon.